Maduro's disaster. American fighter just challenged Venezuela. 5 American combat jets flew over Venezuelan territory right after vessels were attacked and sunk. And believe it or not, the American president made an impressive threat to Maduro, operations inside Venezuela itself. What started as an operation against drug trafficking is turning into something much bigger, and the whole world is watching with concern as Venezuela gets ready to declare a state of emergency. Welcome to another video where we're going to unpack what's really happening between Washington and Caracas, and why this could completely change the political map of the Americas. The situation between the United States and Venezuela has hit a critical point that few international analysts saw coming. Last Thursday, October 2nd, Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino made an accusation that echoed across Latin America. According to him, 5 American combat jets were detected flying close to Venezuela's coast, in an area the country considers under its exclusive jurisdiction. The move was labeled by Nicolas Maduro's government as an illegal incursion and a direct threat to Venezuela's national security. But this wasn't an isolated event. The jets are part of a much larger military operation the United States has been running in the Caribbean region since August of this year. 10 F-35 fighter jets, considered among the most advanced in the world, were sent to Puerto Rico specifically to conduct operations in the southern Caribbean. Along with those fighter planes, Washington deployed 3 guided missile destroyers and mobilized 4,000 Marines and sailors to the region. The American government says this whole military mobilization has one specific goal: to fight drug cartels operating out of Venezuela. According to the Trump administration, those criminal organizations are responsible for sending tons of illegal drugs to the United States, fueling the overdose crisis that kills tens of thousands of Americans every year. But for the Venezuelan government and several Latin American countries, that justification hides much more troubling intentions. At the start of September, Trump made an announcement that caught a lot of people off guard. During a press conference, the American president released a video showing U.S. military forces attacking a vessel that, according to him, was transporting drugs out of Venezuela. The operation allegedly resulted in the elimination of 11 people Trump called terrorists, with no American casualties. That wasn't a one-off incident. Over the last few weeks, multiple vessels have been intercepted and attacked by American forces in Caribbean waters. The Trump administration has called these actions anti-narcotics operations, but the way they're being carried out raises serious legal and diplomatic questions. We're talking about military attacks conducted in international waters, without authorization from nearby countries, and without traditional legal processes. The most significant event happened on Tuesday, October 1st, when Trump made official something that had been discussed behind the scenes for weeks. In a formal notification to the U.S. Congress, the president declared that the United States is in armed conflict with the drug cartels. That statement isn't just rhetoric. It has deep legal implications because it allows the U.S. armed forces to act with greater freedom, using tactics and strategies that would normally be reserved for wartime situations. The language used by Trump and his team is deliberately familiar to anyone who followed the last 2 decades of American foreign policy. The approach against the cartels is following the same playbook used during the so-called War on Terror after the attacks of September 11th. That includes preemptive strikes, operations on foreign soil, and a pretty broad definition of who can be considered a legitimate target. Nicolas Maduro didn't just stand by in the face of this military escalation. The Venezuelan president called emergency meetings with his top military command and, according to sources close to the government, is seriously considering declaring a state of emergency in the country. That measure would give the Venezuelan government extraordinary powers to mobilize military forces, restrict movement, and impose tighter controls over the population. Caracas's message has been consistent. Venezuela categorically denies the existence of the so-called Cartel of the Suns, the name used by the United States for an alleged drug trafficking network involving members of Venezuela's top military brass. For Maduro and his allies, this whole narrative about cartels and narco-trafficking is nothing but a pretext cooked up by Washington to justify a future military intervention in the country. Vladimir Padrino, the defense minister, has been particularly vocal in his statements. He described the presence of American jets as a deliberate provocation, saying the aircraft dared to approach Venezuela's coast in a clear show of aggression. The Venezuelan government activated its air defense systems and put its armed forces on maximum alert, getting ready for what they consider a possible imminent invasion. But Caracas's response isn't limited to the military field. Venezuelan diplomacy kicked into overdrive, seeking support from allied countries and international organizations. Maduro has characterized the American threats as absurd and bizarre, the product of a declining empire trying to reassert its influence in the region through brute force. The Venezuelan president publicly said his country is prepared to resist any attempt at invasion, reminding everyone that Venezuela has trained armed forces and defense equipment acquired over the years. If you thought things were already tense, buckle up, because it could get a lot worse. Last Tuesday, September 30th, Trump made statements that further raised concerns across Latin America. During a meeting with generals and admirals at the Quantico military base in Virginia, the American president announced he's looking very seriously at the possibility of fighting the cartels trying to enter the United States by land, not just by sea. When asked how exactly those land operations would work, Trump was characteristically enigmatic. With a smile, he told the journalists present, "You're going to find out." That deliberately vague answer left analysts and diplomats around the world trying to decipher what exactly the American president has in mind. Are we talking special forces operations infiltrating Venezuelan territory? Drone strikes against specific targets inside the country's borders? Or something even broader? Trump's rhetoric on Venezuela has been consistently aggressive since he started his second term. The American president has made it clear multiple times that he sees Maduro as a threat to U.S. security and the stability of the whole region. Trump said the flow of drugs coming by sea from Venezuela has been reduced to practically zero thanks to the military operations already carried out, an allegation many experts see as exaggerated, but one that signals the White House's confidence in its military strategy. What makes these statements even more worrying is Trump's track record of following through on promises many considered mere political talk. During his first term, he surprised the world several times by executing military actions that seemed unlikely. Now, with a national security team, even more aligned with his positions, and a Congress where he gets significant support for anti-narcotics actions, the barriers to a bigger escalation look smaller than ever. The possibility of an American military intervention in Venezuela worries more than just Caracas. Countries throughout Latin America are watching developments with great apprehension, and some have already publicly voiced their concerns. Brazil, which shares a long border with Venezuela, has particular reasons to be on alert. Brazilian Defense Minister José Múcio openly expressed the Brazilian government's concern about the growing crisis between the United States and Venezuela. In statements to the press, Múcio made it clear that Brazil doesn't want its border turning into a trench, referring to the risk that an armed conflict in Venezuela could spill over into Brazilian territory. That concern isn't unfounded. An American military intervention in Venezuela could trigger a massive humanitarian crisis, with millions of refugees trying to cross into neighboring countries. Colombia, which also borders Venezuela, and is already dealing with more than 2 million Venezuelan migrants on its soil, is watching the situation with extreme caution. Countries like Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Cuba, traditional allies of Caracas, have fiercely condemned American actions and offered rhetorical support to Maduro's government. On the other hand, nations like Argentina and Chile, with governments more aligned with Washington, are keeping careful silence, trying to balance their relations with the United States and the need to maintain regional stability. In the broader international community, reactions range from discreet support for American anti-narcotics operations to firm condemnations of what many see as a violation of Venezuelan sovereignty and international law. The Organization of American States has been a stage for heated debates on the situation, with blocs of countries presenting completely opposite positions on how the crisis should be handled. To fully understand what's going on, we need to look beyond the official narrative about fighting narco-trafficking. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, a strategic resource that has always drawn Washington's attention. The country also holds a prime geographic position in the Caribbean, controlling key maritime routes for international trade. Plus, Caracas maintains close ties with countries the United States considers adversaries, including China, Russia, and Iran. The Trump administration has made it clear it sees Maduro's government not just as a narco-trafficking problem, but as a broader challenge to American influence in the region. The U.S. recognition of Juan Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate president in previous years, though it failed to remove Maduro from power, signaled that Washington was willing to pursue regime change in Caracas. The current military operations can be seen as a continuation of that policy by other means. On the Venezuelan side, Maduro and his government interpret all these actions as part of a long-term strategy to overthrow them and install a government more aligned with American interests. For them, the talk about drug cartels is just the latest version of a justification we've seen before elsewhere. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, protecting civilians in Libya, fighting terrorism in various Middle Eastern countries. there are also important economic considerations. American sanctions against Venezuela, implemented over the last few years, devastated the country's economy but didn't topple Maduro's government. A military intervention would be a dramatic escalation, but also a risky one. The financial costs would be huge, not to mention the human and political costs. Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan are painful reminders of how military interventions can drag on far longer than expected and cost way more than planned. Let's be straight about what a military conflict between the United States and Venezuela could mean. Despite the obvious disparity in military power, an American invasion wouldn't be the cakewalk some imagine. Venezuela has sizable armed forces with around 250,000 active military personnel and over 1 million reservists and militiamen. The country has invested billions in Russian and Chinese military equipment over the last 2 decades, including air defense systems, tanks, aircraft, and missiles. More importantly, Venezuela has geography on its side. The country is mountainous, with dense tropical forests and wide urban areas where fighting would be extremely tough. Any invading force would face not just the Venezuelan army, but potentially millions of armed civilians through the Bolivarian militias Maduro has built up over the years. Military history is full of examples where technologically superior forces ran into serious trouble against determined opponents fighting on their own turf. There's also the matter of international alliances. Russia and China have significant investments in Venezuela and wouldn't be happy to see a regional ally removed by American intervention. While it's unlikely those powers would step in directly with troops, they could provide indirect support, making the situation even more complicated. Cuba, historically close to Caracas, could also get involved in some way, ratcheting up tensions across the Caribbean. From a humanitarian standpoint, the numbers are scary. Venezuela is already facing a severe economic and humanitarian crisis, with millions living in poverty and struggling to find food and medicine. An armed conflict would exponentially worsen that situation, potentially creating the largest refugee crisis the Americas have ever seen. Neighboring countries, already stretched thin by Venezuelans who fled in recent years, would be completely overwhelmed by a new wave of millions of desperate people escaping violence. We can't fully understand what Trump is doing without considering American domestic politics. Fighting narco-trafficking and controlling immigration are core issues for Trump's base. By framing the military operations in the Caribbean as part of the fight against drugs that kill Americans, Trump seeks to justify aggressive actions in a way that resonates with his voters. In the U.S. Congress, there are clear divisions on how to deal with Venezuela. Some Republicans strongly support a hard line against Maduro, seeing the Venezuelan president as a threat that needs to be removed. Democrats, on the other hand, are divided. Some agree Maduro is a problem, but have serious reservations about military intervention, especially after the costly experiences in the Middle East. Others strongly oppose any action that could be seen as American imperialism in Latin America. Trump's notification to Congress about armed conflict with cartels is significant because it lets the president act with more autonomy without needing specific legislative approval for each operation. That gives the White House considerable flexibility to gradually escalate military actions, testing the limits of what's politically acceptable both at home and internationally. So where exactly are we at this critical moment? The last 48 hours have shown a clear acceleration of tensions. We've got American jets flying near Venezuela's coast, warships positioned in the Caribbean, ongoing attacks on vessels accused of drug trafficking, and an American president promising to expand operations onto land. On the other side, we see Venezuela mobilizing defenses, considering a state of emergency, and seeking international support to resist what it considers imminent aggression. The big question everyone's asking is Trump really going to order an invasion of Venezuela? The honest answer is that nobody knows for sure, probably not even people inside the White House. What we can say is that the United States is clearly building military capacity in the region and creating the legal and political justifications that would make an intervention possible. There's a historical pattern worth considering. American administrations often escalate military presence gradually, testing reactions and laying the groundwork for bigger actions if needed. What starts as anti-narcotics operations can evolve into strikes against cartel infrastructure, then into special forces operations against leadership targets, and eventually into something bigger if the situation is judged favorable. Several factors will shape how this plays out in the coming months. The reaction of the international community will matter. If Latin American countries unite strongly against American actions, that could give Washington pause. On the other hand, if there's support, even if discreet, from regional governments, Trump may feel he has the green light to move forward. The economic and political situation inside Venezuela also matters. If Maduro's government looks weaker or unstable, that could be seen as an opportunity in Washington. If it looks stronger and more resilient, the calculations change. Not everyone in Washington supports the military approach. A bunch of Latin America experts, former diplomats, and national security analysts have warned about the dangers of an intervention in Venezuela. They point out that military operations rarely solve complex political problems and often create unintended consequences that can last decades. There are also practical concerns about military capacity. U.S. armed forces are already committed in multiple regions around the world, with significant presence in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, due to the situation with Ukraine, and a growing focus on the Indo-Pacific because of tensions with China. Opening a new military front in South America would require substantial resources and attention, potentially leaving the United States more vulnerable elsewhere. From an international law perspective, the operations Trump is conducting exist in a legal gray area. Attacking vessels in international waters on claims of drug transport without proper legal processes raises serious questions about respect for sovereignty and international norms. If those operations expand onto Venezuelan territory proper, the legal issues become even more problematic. We're clearly at a decisive moment in U.S.-Venezuela relations. The actions of recent weeks represent the biggest American military escalation in the region in decades. Trump has built a framework that allows significant military action under the pretext of fighting narco-trafficking, while Maduro mobilizes his country for what he sees as defense against imperial aggression. The question that remains is whether this trajectory can be reversed before it reaches the point of no return. Is there room for diplomacy, for talks that can de-escalate tensions and find solutions that don't involve bloodshed? International organizations, mediator countries, and voices of reason on both sides will play a crucial role in the coming weeks and months. What we know for sure is that the decisions made in Washington and Caracas in the next few weeks won't just affect Americans and Venezuelans. They'll shape the future of the whole region, set important precedents on sovereignty and intervention, and potentially influence international relations far beyond the Americas. This is one of those historic moments when leaders have to choose between the easy path of force and the harder, but wiser path of patience and diplomacy. The whole world is watching, and history will judge the choices made at this critical moment.